Okay, this video is 38 minutes long. I'm going to cut the end off, and I'm going to play it at 2x. So, plan to be here for 20 minutes plus commentary. Just set your expectations. There's a lot of filler words, but then there's some really important points throughout that need to be addressed and rebutted. So, strap in. It's time. I'm done with this. Let me set this on 2x. Here we go.
Yaron, we need to translate this into Japanese. No one here in Japan understands that the A-bomb actually saved Japanese and American lives. Well, great, translate it. You know, get some of the Japanese objectivists.
And if this is too fast for you guys, let me know. I'll slow it down. I have to consume so much content every day just to keep up with the news cycle and then also have time to produce content that my brain is just used to consuming everything at 2x speed. If that's not something that you guys can keep up with, or if it's too fast, let me know. Otherwise, I'll 2x it until we get to an important point and maybe slow it down for that.
To translate it to Japanese and to put it out there.
You want 1.5x? Okay, fair enough, fair enough. We'll do 1.5. Okay.
Right. But look, the morality of Hiroshima is not about saving Japanese lives.
Is that better?
The morality of Hiroshima is about saving American lives. The job of the American government is to defend American lives. Now, it's true.
Now, a fundamental tenet of objectivism is the individual. That's almost all there is in objectivism, is the individual. Phobes, please post that quote. That would be perfect to discuss. The one that you posted earlier that I said was a brilliantly found quote. Please post that to Discord. I don't have Element open right now. If you don't mind, I would really appreciate it. And the other quote I would like to read is one that I posted in the comments of this video, just to sort of set this up. And you know what's interesting is that my comment is one of the top upvoted comments on this video, and it's way down here. You know what that means? It means that the channel owner thumbs down it. So YouTube kind of pushes that towards the bottom. But it's got a lot of engagement. In fact, where is the Ayn Rand quote? I posted the Ayn Rand quote. Is that gone? I'm sorry, guys. I should have had this ready. I'm kind of surprised right now. I wonder, just to sort of set the stage for objectivism, objectivism's conception of the individual and of collectivism. And the first, thank you, Phobes. Let me read this quote from Anthem first. This is in Ayn Rand's book, Anthem. The word we is as lime poured over men, which sets and hardens to stone and crushes all beneath it. And that which is white and that which is black are lost equally in the gray of it. It is the word by which the depraved steal the virtue of the good, by which the weak steal the might of the strong, by which the fools steal the wisdom of the sages. The word we. Another quote from Ayn Rand. I'm not sure where this is from. You can let me know if you know. Quote, collectivism means the subjugation of the individual to a group, whether to a race, class, or state, does not matter. Collectivism holds that man must be chained to collective action and collective thought for the sake of what is called the common good. Ayn Rand. Actually, I'm going to leave Discord open. Sorry. All right, let's proceed.
That in doing so, we also saved probably millions of Japanese lives. But that's just an added bonus. It's not what makes it moral. Morality is not about counting different...
Count the number of we's in this video.
Body counts. It's about counting your body count. It's about winning by minimizing your own casualties. 75 years ago, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb in human history on the city of Hiroshima in Japan. Somewhere between 60...
The United States dropped a bomb on Japan. Now, this is, when used in this way, this is an equivocation, like we talked about in that last video. The United States denotes both a geographical location that exists in the world, same with Japan, and a group of people that live there or that consider themselves citizens or are considered citizens. Watch for the jumping back and forth between the geographical United States and Japan, which is a valid term, and the collectivist label called United States. And the difference is when you talk about United States taking an action, obviously you're not talking about a piece of dirt taking an action. You're talking about people, individuals taking action.
60 to 100,000 people were dead almost instantaneously, although much of that number, the number's uncertain. Some of that number probably assumes the deaths of people in the days, weeks, months afterwards from the radiation who did not die instantaneously. A few days later, the United States dropped a second, and indeed the last nuclear bomb to be dropped on Nagasaki, another Japanese city. A few days after that, the Japanese officially surrendered with no conditions, complete unconditional surrender of the Japanese, which brought about the end of World War II. Now, since that time, the dropping of the nuclear bombs, the dropping of the atomic bombs has been second-guessed every single year, every single day. Today, one could argue it's not even second-guessed anymore. Today, it is viewed as an atrocity, as a war crime, as a disaster, as horrific, as evil. There are demands that America, in a sense, take a knee, apologize for the horror that it had brought the world on those 2 days with the dropping of the atomic bomb. If you go through Twitter and you look at the different comments about the 75th anniversary, almost all of them are depicted as one of the most horrific events ever, an event that we should be ashamed of, an event that the United States should apologize for.
Well, just to be clear, I don't think we should be ashamed of it. I think the people that did it and the people that support it being done should be ashamed of it. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't consent. I wasn't even around. And there were a lot of people that didn't consent that were around on both sides.
An event that we should remember for its horror. And in many of the tweets or by some of the survivors, they're getting pretty old now and they're not going to be survivors soon, but people who as children lived through it and are telling stories about it and reminiscing about it. So, if you look at Hiroshima, I mean, everywhere I look, by the way, the numbers keep changing. It's hard to tell the exact numbers, but somewhere it's between 60 to 100,000 total deaths, probably closer to 100,000 if you count the people who died from the fallout in the months following the attack. So the question is, was this justified? Was the attack on Hiroshima, was the dropping of the nuclear bombs the right thing to do? Should we use this day as a day of remembrance of the Japanese deaths? Or should we use this as a day of remembrance to remember the moral courage, I'd even say the heroism, of an American president, Harry Truman, who made the decision to drop those bombs? Was it the right thing to do? Was it the wrong thing to do? Was it the moral thing to do? Was it the militarily right thing to do? Or wasn't it? Now, as people encourage us to use this day to remember the hundreds of thousands of Japanese killed in Hiroshima, let me remind you of something else. That on the Pacific, World War II, in a sense, or the Pacific War, didn't begin with the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, but began in 1931, when Japan occupied Manchuria, which is in northeast China, and then attacked China in an attempt to conquer it entirely. 1941, of course, Japan invaded Thailand, Malaysia, bombed the U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii, for those who are not sure. And of course, Korea had been under Japanese occupation since 1910. Not to mention the Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Burma, all to be occupied by the Japanese. Now, let me just give credit here. Whoops, why don't I have his name here? Let me just see. Article doesn't have a name. That's not good. All right, I'll get his name in a minute. I'm using, part of my reference here, I've got a number of references. Part of my reference is an article that an objectivist from Europe sent me. His name is Alex, which was a research project he did a few years ago on the dropping of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Alex Leibovici, who I think is Romanian. Yes. and it was published. Essay was published in Romanian. I got a translated version in English. But Japan, by this point, 1945, had been an imperialist power since 1910, had occupied all those countries, and had been savage and brutal in its occupation. I mean, the number of people that it had slaughtered in China, the rape and pillage that was committed, the massacres of civilians are hard to imagine in the 21st century. By 1945, it's estimated there were 6 million military casualties as a result of the Pacific War, of which 2 million were Japanese. 2 million Japanese soldiers had died during the Pacific War that the Japanese initiated, that the Japanese launched. 25 million civilians, let me say that again, 25 million civilians had been killed, of which 1 million were Japanese. So let's be clear, the Japanese killed 24 million civilians all over Asia, in China, Manchuria, Korea, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. 24 million people. And we're not talking about the wounded, the maimed, which is usually 3 to 4 times those numbers. So somewhere around 100 million people, 100 million people were maimed, injured by the Japanese from 1931 to 1945. The Japanese had initiated violence throughout Asia, throughout the Pacific.
One more time.
Million people were maimed, injured by the Japanese from 1931 to 1945.
By who?
The Japanese had initiated violence throughout Asia.
Who initiated violence?
Throughout the Pacific, and had launched a brutal attack against the United States of America in Pearl Harbor. They had declared war on the United States.
Who? Who initiated violence? Who violated the non-aggression principle? Was it a group of individuals acting together, or was it literally every person, including the babies in Japan? I don't even think he believes the latter, but it's an important ethical distinction. Ethics only function at the individual level between the individuals involved in an act. They don't function between these euphemized collectives.
And tens of thousands of American servicemen had already died. Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended that nightmare. Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the nightmare that had resulted in 25, or 31 if you had the soldiers, 31 million people dying, and maybe 100, 120 million people being maimed. Now, it's horrific to think of 80, 100,000 people dying in a day. But if we're going to remember anything, we should be remembering the victims of Japanese imperialism. We should be remembering the victims of Japanese barbarism, of Japanese fascism.
Sure.
They're the ones who should be remembered. It is Japan who began the war. It is Japan that sought to conquer the entire Pacific. It is Japan that slaughtered people left and right.
Who? All of Japan?
It is Japan
why
that is
are
morally responsible for every...
This is all collectivizing. This is all collectivism. This is talking about all the people, all the individuals in a geographical area, many of whom did not consent. Did not consent. They didn't even have a say. They weren't asked. In fact, if they spoke up, they would have been murdered. Did not consent. You are collectivizing those innocent, peaceful, non-aggressive people, disconsenting people, into this term Japan.
The person who died during that war. So, do I mourn the people who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Not really. Not really. Their death is a consequence of their own political leaders' efforts to conquer the Pacific.
What if they didn't consent? Then they weren't their political leaders. If they dissented, they would have been killed. Those weren't their political leaders. They're totally exempt from this equation that he's constructing here. They're not part of it.
Efforts that led to the destruction and death on a massive scale, unprecedented scale. Scale only matched by the Germans in Europe in terms of numbers of human beings, numbers, the sheer quantity of life lost. So no, I think it's their victims who should be remembered. But you say many of the people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were innocent. Sure, of course they were. Certainly the children were. But the adults,
certainly.
Were the adults planning to overthrow their own government, to stop the horror that...
Okay, this is like a point that we need to write down in our notes. We have a point of admission. Certainly the children were innocent. Now, I'm going to write that down because we're going to need to refer back to that, probably over and over in this video. Certainly, the children were innocent. There, let's just put that up here in the corner of the screen. There we go. We don't want to lose that.
11:52.
Welcome, Kason. Good to see you. Are you here? Are you popping up? Are you up?
I am not visible at the moment, but I will be after this bit.
Fair enough. Well, you always join in the worst possible parts of the stream. Here we are talking about melting babies again. Last time you joined in, it was right at this point too, I believe. All right. Anyway, let's continue.
That they were inflicting on the world? With adults sabotaging their own war? But the adults? Sure. Of course they were. Certainly the children were.
Certainly.
With adults planning to overthrow their own government, to stop the horror that they were inflicting on the world? With adults sabotaging their own production as to starve the war machine so that they would stop slaughtering people all over the world? No.
Were the adults, another collective term for a group of individuals, were they taking positive action to resist this government? Well, he says no. I have to assume that some of them were, but it doesn't matter. You don't have a positive obligation to resist a cartel to keep from being co-conspirators in whatever crimes they commit. If a cartel does something wrong and I happen to live in the cartel's district and I didn't go out of my way to sabotage or forcibly resist or to stop them, that doesn't link me to them. Just because they claim ownership over the geographical area has precisely nothing to do with me. Now, it would be a heroic thing, certainly, for me to try and resist as best I could to save to grind to a halt the meat grinder that was that army. Sure, that would have been heroic. There's no positive moral obligation to do that to keep yourself from being collectivized into the culpability for their crimes. Another missed point here that I wanted to make sure we got clear.
With adults planning to overthrow their own government, to stop the horror that they were inflicting on the world?
No obligation to do that.
With adults sabotaging their own...
Especially because, their lives would have been in grave risk, grave danger from their own government had they resisted. It's a cartel. It's not their government. He talks about their government over and over. It's not. They're a cartel. Whether or not these people consented, they would have still been wrapped up in it. And all it takes is one disconsenter melted from a nuclear bomb to set the ethics of this down the path that we're going down against what Yaron is saying. It's not a numbers game. It takes one melted baby, one innocent adult, resisting or not, doesn't matter.
Production as to starve the war machine so that they would stop slaughtering people all over the world? No. I'm sorry. But adults in any country are morally responsible for the actions of their government.
Adults in any country are morally responsible for the actions of their government. This is nothing but a bag of collectivism that he just handed us. Rhetorical collectivism. One more time.
With adults sabotaging their own production as to starve the war machine so that they would stop slaughtering people all over the world? No. I'm sorry. But adults in any country are morally responsible for the actions of their government.
I am not responsible in any way for even a single tiny teensy action of the government that claims the rightful control over this area. I disconsent. I don't consent. That frees me from any sort of culpability as long as I'm not going out of, as long as I'm not assisting in them in their crimes. Say by building and selling them atomic bombs that they used to melt 100,000 people, many of which were innocents, then maybe I'm culpable because I'm contributing to their crimes in a very material way. The crime would not have happened had I not done that. Then you can say I'm culpable for the crimes of my government. It's not my government. Don't claim it. Some of those people over there definitely dissented and did not claim the actions of their government and wished their government hadn't done that. And in fact, there were people that were against the war. All it takes is one innocent death. It's not a numbers game. You can't collectivize this, objectivist. To have the gall to sit there next to Ayn Rand, I name for Yaron, if you're watching this video, my son's name is Atlas. My daughter's name is Dagny. I respect Ayn Rand to a degree not many other people do. So for you to sit there and call my ethical system that doesn't advocate melting children equivalent and no better than that of a communist, and then to take this position, I've just lost all respect for you. I've seen what makes you cheer. I do not care about your insults.
It's why I think politics is important. It's because whether you like politics or not, they impact your life, and they speak for you, and they act on your behalf, and they represent you. And if they do something really, really bad, you suffer the consequences.
Now that's true. Usually, if the government in an area does something really bad, the consequences don't fall on the politicians that did the thing. Oh no, it's the subjects that pay for the crimes of the ruling class. That's true. But he's saying it like it should be that way, when in fact it should be the opposite. The assholes that kill innocent people are the ones that should be melted, not the innocent citizens, not the babies.
The decisions made by politicians always fall on the shoulders of the population. That's why it's the population's responsibility to fight bad decisions, to object to bad decisions, and to replace bad politicians, to penalize them when their mistakes are bad. This is always the case.
I don't have to do shit. I didn't put any of them in that position of power, nor do I consent to any of them being in those positions of power. I want them gone from my life and to have no influence over me. And by the mere flick of the consent switch in my brain, the ethics of the situation are clear. They have no rightful control over my life. They do not represent me, and I am not culpable for their crimes. That's how individualist ethics work, objectivist.
Politicians don't pay the price. You pay the price. So no, the real horror of World War II is what the Germans and Japanese did in the world. The real horror of World War II is what fascism brought to the world. Not Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that actually ended the nightmare, that actually stopped it all. Anonymous Doe asked, do you view Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor as unprovoked? The U.S. was aiding their enemy. From their perspective, it's cutting off a supplier. I mean, this is a fascinating question. Ayn Rand believed, I think, that it was provoked in the sense that the United States stopped providing the Japanese with steel, and thus was in a sense helping Japan's enemies, or starving the Japanese from the raw material they needed in order to continue to engage in their war. And she believed that FDR probably knew an attack was coming on Pearl Harbor, but ignored the warnings because he wanted it to happen, because it was the way for him to get into the war, and he wanted to go into the war. He wanted to get into the war, particularly when it came to Europe. He wanted to go fight Germany. And the American public didn't want that. This was a period of American, what was called isolationism, but the idea was we wouldn't interfere in other people's wars. But so he provoked the Japanese in order to attack Pearl Harbor, so he could use that as an excuse to go to war with the Japanese and the Germans, primarily the Germans.
We.
I don't know that that's true. It certainly could be true, and it certainly doesn't. I don't think that's a crazy idea.
We. The word "we" is as lime poured over men.
But it doesn't change the fact. It does not change the fact that Japan initiated war with the United States. Stopping trade, boycotting Japan, is not an act of war. Now, it is an act of determining.
Stopping the act of trade is not an act of war. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's certainly an initiation of force against the people that want to trade as long as they're peaceful.
That the other country is an enemy of yours.
And I'm sure he's made that argument before in debating socialists.
So I can understand why the Japanese were offended, right? But in and of itself, it is not the equivalent of bombing, killing, maiming. Now notice what's interesting here. A lot of people say, we provoked the Japanese to attack us by selling steel to them, by not selling steel to them. And at the same time, they say we should boycott China. We should raise tariffs on China. We should not sell stuff to China. Or we should not buy stuff from China.
I'm not part of any of these we's.
You can't have it both ways. Now, what's interesting to me is that Ayn Rand suggested maybe it was okay to sell steel to Japan when Japan was a real threat to the United States and engaging in warfare and massacres and destruction all over Asia. And that was okay. Then I suspect she would say it's okay to trade with China today. But the point here is it doesn't matter. Japan initiated war with China. Japan occupied Korea. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Japan started a war. And
Japan's doing
all
a
the
lot.
blood spilt in that war.
For a concept, Japan is a really active concept. I haven't seen a single other concept in the world be quite so active. It's just collectivizing. Yeah, sure. There's a very real threat. There was a very large number of human individuals that were doing massive amounts of damage and harm, and this is not me erasing or discounting any of that. That was as evil as can be. As evil as, say, nuking 100,000 innocent people. And don't forget, the people fighting on the American side of that war were conscripted. Slaves. Right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure the draft helped World War II. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. That's slavery. So the people doing a lot of this fighting were not exactly doing it of their own free will. Let's not forget.
Drop of blood spilt in that war is on Japan. It's on their leaders, but it's also on their people. The people who agreed to fight for those leaders, the people who agreed to work for those leaders, the people who agreed to continue to function in a so-called civilized society for those leaders. It's their fault. And if they had to die to end it, so be it. Now, it's really interesting that people are so obsessed about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because in the months leading up to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the United States firebombed, not used nuclear weapons, but just used bombs, firebombed Tokyo and every other major city in Japan, with the exception of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. By the time Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, the United States had already killed well over 100,000 people from the air, just in Tokyo. They had turned 1 million people homeless. 1 million people homeless. They had destroyed. If you look at pictures of Tokyo, once the United States occupied, it was just flat. There was almost nothing there. They were firebombed and crushed. So, Americans were already killing massive numbers of civilians in Japan. Again, justifiably. What difference does it make what kind of weapon you use to kill people?
Oh my God. Justifiably, huh? Justifiably. Look, I understand he's probably arguing to a mostly statist audience, so I don't fault him for making this argument that, look, you don't complain about Hiroshima if you weren't complaining about the fire bombings. I'm not that person. I'm the ethical sort of individualist critic right now, and that is not understandable.
It's the killing that matters, right? All right, so some people say, by that point, Japan had already lost the war. They weren't going to win the war. So why bother? Why do this? You could have just kept on going and you would have defeated them. Well, at what cost? How many hundreds of thousands of American kids would have died trying to fight on the shores of Japan?
Well, why don't we call for the end of their slavery that forced them to be on the shores of Japan in that situation? Why wouldn't that be the first call?
I mean, it's hard to imagine. Now, you could add in the Japanese casualties.
We had to nuke people so that we didn't have to send our slaves to die.
Add in the Japanese civilians that would have died if the United States had fought on the beaches of Japan. You could easily argue, and this is not an exaggeration, that over 1 million people would have died if the United States had actually invaded Japan in a conventional attack. So what is better? To use a nuke, end the war by killing 140,000 people, let's say? Or invade a country and land up having millions of people dead? It's just the math doesn't even add up. Not that I think the math matters.
Okay. At least he's
because
consistent there.
Math. It's about principle.
Oh, okay. It's about principle.
Is, in my view, and I've written about this, you can find it in my article about just war theory. The principle is the United States government, in fighting a war of self-defense, a war it didn't start, it's sole responsibility.
That's the collective United States, not the dirt United States. Just to be clear of our in our equivocations of what's happening here.
It really is. Its sole responsibility is to protect the lives of Americans. And it should fight a war to win it fast, cheap, and with as few American casualties as possible.
Its sole responsibility is to protect the American citizens. It represents the American citizens. So if it, say, went across the ocean and killed some innocent people, you just said that the American citizens are culpable for that. So its sole responsibility is to represent its citizens, not just to protect them by obliterating the families of anybody that opposed them or harmed them, right? Like, it's not just to protect them. It's not. If you're going to be the representative, which they're not, you got to be more than just the protectors. You have to act responsibly and ethically. It's so obvious.
And
why are we talking about it?
And so be it. And so be it. And indeed, that's what happened in Japan. We won that war, and as I'll get to, we also won the peace. We have all those Japanese people hating us, blowing themselves up to kill Americans as revenge. Why didn't that happen? Just to give you an illustration of the kind of casualties that would have been involved. In a few weeks before Hiroshima, an island of Iwo Jima that was defended by 21,000 Japanese. The United States suffered 7,000 dead, 20,000 wounded. You know, almost all the Japanese died. Now, to defend Japan, you would be facing at least 2 million Japanese soldiers.
To be clear, I am not a collectivist. I'm not defending Japan. I'm defending the innocent victims that were melted. And I'm happy to also defend the innocent victims that Japan destroyed. It's called consistency.
Huge quantities.
Ethics don't cease to exist just because you've declared this thing called war. You've spoken war into existence. You don't just get to call something war and then go kill innocent people and say, "Oh, ethics don't exist here. This is war, guys. This is war." It's magic spells. That's bullshit. It's not how it works. Like, somebody steals from me, I don't get to declare war on him and then burn down the apartment building that he lives in and all the other innocent people next to him.
Huge quantities of civilians. They would have all died. The Japanese soldiers, you know, a significant number of the $2 million. It's just ridiculous. The whole thing is just ridiculous. The whole way of approaching this is ridiculous. If you can win a war fast, you win a war fast. If you can win a war by killing their population in order to save your troops, you kill their population. You kill their population. All right. Jennifer asked, do you think the relative peace the world has had since was a result of dropping the bomb? Yes, I do. I mean, one of the reasons Japan has become peaceful and has a fantastic constitution and has relative free markets is because we dropped the bombs. And then once the world saw what bombs could do, it was obvious that you don't want to take on the United States. You didn't want to risk having bombs dropped on you. So I think that kept at bay the Russians. It makes the Chinese think twice about anything they might do. So any country is not going to go to war with the United States. I mean, the wars that the United States has engaged in since World War II have been wars that it chose to engage in by sending troops far away, not wars that it had to fight, not wars of self-defense, wars that it got involved in for no reason. Korea, Vietnam, even I would argue the first Gulf War. And then when it did fight wars, it has fought weakly, pathetically, lost, not used nukes, and not used the might of the American military force at all. And as a consequence, what has happened? As a consequence, the United States has lost those wars. And as a consequence, the world has become, in many respects, less safe, not more safe. Because people don't fear the United States anymore. They worry about the United States.
Melt enough babies to keep the United States secure. Hashtag ethics.
So invading
Hashtag
Japan
objectivism.
was really not an option. Some people say, oh, but the Russians had just entered the Pacific frontier, and the Russians would have taken them out. Really? The Russians had just lost, 20 million people in Europe. The military was completely depleted. The only reason the Russians had a military was because it was supplied by the Americans. Imagine if the Russians indeed had sent in troops and occupied Japan. First of all, without any question, many more Japanese would have died than died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But secondly, Japan would have been communist. Is that a good outcome?
All this consequentialist, these arguments, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with. I'm not enough of a detailed historian of the time and the conflict and what was going on and the myriad of geopolitical influences that were happening on the situation. So I'm not even going to quibble about this stuff. It's just all consequent. None of it justifies melting, innocent people and babies. These aren't justifications. Like melting 100,000 innocent people might have somehow magically turned the world into a beautiful paradise of capitalism and love and friendship, and it still would not have justified it. That is not how ethics function.
You're now going to hire communists to fight your battles? It's bad enough, in my view, that we did that in Europe, that we allowed the Russians to fight our war, that we supported the Russians, that we promoted Stalin and handed all of Eastern Europe to him. So no, the idea that Russia was going to do it would be bizarre. There's a claim that we shouldn't have dropped the second bomb because by the first, they were about to surrender. There's actually very thin evidence about this. The Japanese were still debating it, but and while they were debating voices in Japan supporting surrender,
there were significant voices in the government supporting surrender. That sounds like people that didn't consent.
The Japanese government itself was not unanimous after Hiroshima. While the civilians wanted...
It wasn't unanimous before Hiroshima.
...to surrender. The military did not, and the emperor refused. Only after they saw it a second time. Only after they saw the Americans' willingness to continue. Even though they didn't know that we had no more bombs. I think there were only 3 bombs. The test bomb that we did in where was it, New Mexico, and the 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They didn't know there were no more. But they didn't take the risk. Right? They didn't take the risk. It's only after the second bomb. They completely convinced the Japanese that they had no chance whatsoever. Remember, the effect of these nukes was not so much just to defeat the Japanese. It was to shock them into defeat. It was to shock them into submission. It was to shock them onto their knees. And being on their knees is really, really crucial for the peace that came afterwards. We'll get to that in a minute. People argue, we could have had peace talks. Well, peace talks would have just led to a ceasefire, which would have led to a rise in Japanese imperialism 5 years later because they would have thought, we never lost the war, we could still win, we can still do it. Which is what happened, by the way, to Germany after World War I. It wasn't thoroughly smashed, it wasn't thoroughly defeated, it wasn't crushed and brought to their knees. So what happened? They waited for the opportunity to launch a second war, which is World War II. If we crushed them in World War I, not clearly there would have been a World War II. Or if America had never entered World War I and we'd let it go on forever, maybe there never would have been a World War II. Some people talk about maybe the United States should have less stringent terms. But again, what led to the peace was the fact that the United States demanded and accepted and received unconditional surrender. So no, in my view, every year on the anniversary of Hiroshima, the Japanese government should send a letter to the United States people thanking us for dropping that bomb.
Jesus Christ.
Because that bomb not only that ended the war for the Japanese as well as for us, but that created modern Japan, that brought about the peace and stability and prosperity and wealth Japanese society is.
I can't believe I ever got offended by this guy saying that I was anything like a communist. This guy's moral compass is so inverted that I guess it's a compliment. What is happening right now?
What happened after the surrender? Well, what happened was that the Japanese gave up. They gave up all pretense. They gave up the idea that they would rule Asia. They gave up the sense of racial, cultural superiority. They gave up on those aspects of their culture. And what did they embrace? They embraced what, to a large extent, to some extent at least, what the Americans left them with. So one of the interesting things about the American occupation of Japan is that as part of the occupation, a constitution was written, a new constitution that established the modern Japanese country.
They, us, they, us, they.
And who wrote that constitution? Well, not the Japanese. MacArthur had no patience for the Japanese constitution. He had no patience for a resurrection of the old Japanese system. So General MacArthur and one of his assistants sat down and they wrote the Japanese constitution. And, one of the things that they did was that they ultimately didn't prosecute the emperor, which they were planning to do. And in exchange, the emperor endorsed the constitution. And this is a constitution that, for example, in the constitution it says that all individuals has inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In their constitution. They created a form of government. They created a system of government. They created a constitutional government that has led to incredible prosperity and peace in Asia, and particularly in Japan. So the Japanese are far, far better off.
He didn't say I was a communist. He said that like anarcho-capitalists, libertarian types. Their ethics are as dangerous as the communists' ethics. Like, he called the morality of sort of anarcho-capitalism on par with the morality of communism.
For having ended the war quickly, 1945 is late, having not had to fight on Japanese soil, for ending it with a shock to the system, so that they were open to accepting a constitution that MacArthur basically forced on them. And the Japanese don't hate us, because the realization that the Japanese came to was that they were wrong. They were wrong. They'd engaged in activities that were unjustified.
The only way the people living in Japan would realize they were wrong is if they bought into the collectivism which Ayn Rand fights against in all the talking that she's done about individualism. So the only way he's right here is if they were not objectivists, which is what he would want them to be, right?
They shouldn't have launched a war. They shouldn't have done what they did. They swore never to do it again. And that kind of educational benefit, if you will. Sometimes you need a shock to the system to get that.
All right, sometimes I think we're about done with the video. I don't think there's much more here.
Thoroughly defeat your enemies if you're gonna establish that.
Paul Starr just sent me this link here.
All right, so what are kind of the lessons for today? Well, the lessons for today, I mean, I've written about extensively. I encourage you to read Winning the Unwinnable War, edited by Langione, where I have 3 essays. And in those essays, I articulate the case for fighting the war against Islamism, which was post 9/11, which was the war that America needed to fight properly, which means brutally, which means to crush the enemy, to bring them to their knees.
Sorry, the babies were not your enemy.
Is if it is defeated.
The innocent people were not your enemy. By definition, they were not your enemy. It's not him. We're not talking about him. Look, like he's like collectivizing himself into this group. Okay, here's the article.
It's only when they know they cannot win.
All right. I don't think there's any more new points that we haven't heard. I'll just read the first paragraph of this article. Prior to the atomic attacks of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, elements existed within the Japanese government that were trying to find a way to end the war. They attempted to enlist the help of the Soviet Union to serve as an intermediary in negotiations. From these intercepts, the United States learned that some within the Japanese government advocated outright surrender. A few diplomats overseas cabled home to urge just that. So it's not unanimous, and it's easy to understand that certainly the peasants and the babies and the housewives and the guys just doing their job and trying to survive and live their life certainly had no say nor consent in any of this, and were certainly not culpable for the very real, nasty, terrible, disgusting crimes of the people working in their governments and military. Those were innocent victims of the nuclear bomb. This is the last time I'm going to address this on this channel, unless there is some kind of new argument that I haven't seen yet, which I can't imagine at this point. I don't want to run this topic just into the ground such that you guys don't tune in anymore because you're like, God, I'm tired of hearing about Hiroshima. But like, we've had Austin Peterson and now Yaron Brook endorsing this atrocity, this terrible, unethical inversion of right and wrong. And hopefully we have now put it to rest. I guess I will end by saying he knows that the children were innocent and literally endorsed it anyway. Hi, Kaysen. How you doing?
Not sure how to feel at the moment. Made a thing.
Oof. That hurts. Man, I really liked Yaron Brook before today. Yeah. I can't in good conscience send anybody to his content anymore, as good as some of it is. This is just an abrogation of his own principles. Just disgusting. The word we is as lime poured over men, which sets and hardens to stone and crushes all beneath it, and that which is white and that which is black are lost equally in the gray of it. It is the word by which the depraved steal the virtue of the good, by which the weak steal the might of the strong, by which the fools steal the wisdom of the sages, and by which Yaron Brook justifies the melting of babies. So I've got one more on Yaron Brook. This is a video I should have responded to back in June of this year when he created it. This is why I don't sanction anarchists. It's 14 minutes long. We'll play it on 1.5x again. But I think it's worthy. I think this is like, this felt to me like the final word from him. The context of this video is that we had a lot of viewers at the time that had been, like I said, they were hitting up the super chats and the chat and the comments of his videos and his live streams. And we had people that were blowing him up apparently on Twitter repeatedly, constantly, inviting him politely, respectfully to come on the show to talk through this stuff with me, or even to have a debate if that was the format that he wanted. All of that, like I said, was ignored or whatever. This video from him really seemed, it felt like, and this is probably not true, he probably has no idea who I am. Let's go with that. Even through all the harassment. But this video felt sort of like a low-key message to me, like this is the last thing he was going to say on it. And so, you know, if that's the case, this will be the last thing I say on it. We don't need to hound him anymore. I don't really much care for his moral judgments at this point anymore anyway. So let's let this be the bookend for this. I mean, like, look, if the guy puts out some more garbage fire content, like with this Hiroshima stuff, I might do a commentary on him in the future. But let's put this to bed. Okay, here we go.
All right. About Ayn Rand Institute relations or your relations to other groups, why are you so like hateful towards libertarians when they seem to be the closest ally to your ideas?
Well, I'm only hateful to some libertarians. There's some libertarians who I love, who are great, who I support, who I've worked with.
The statist ones.
Panels with, who I've done all kinds of things. The ones I hate tend to be the ones who tend to be the rabid anarchists, the people who believe that anarchism is a solution. And as I said, in my debate with an anarchist in Poland, I consider anarchism.
I would say that it is the solution to it is the end to a problem.
Anarchism, and you can include so-called anarcho-capitalism in that. I believe that
the debate he had with the dude in Poland, you can find it on YouTube, was really bad. The arguments that anarchist made, I disagree with. Hard disagree with. Basically moral relativism, probably the worst showing, the worst face of anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism that I could have imagined in a debate. And I don't want to sound like I'm like I'm ascribing bad motives to Yaron here when I say this, but it's interesting that that was the anarchist that he chose to debate, was probably the one with the easiest arguments to defeat. I don't really even know of many other anarcho-capitalists that hold the positions of the person that he debated. Okay, enough caveats for me on that.
It's as bad as communism and fascism. I believe that that anarchism is a solution. And as I said, in my debate with an anarchist in Poland, I consider anarchism, and you can include so-called anarcho-capitalism in that. I believe that it's as bad as communism and fascism. I believe that it is the devil. It is really, really, really destructive to human life. I know I've just offended a bunch of you. I can see it on Sebastian's face, but that's the problem on video, right? But that is the reality of what I believe, right? I think anarchy leads to nothing, and I've said this dozens of times. I think anarchy leads to nothing but bloodshed, destruction, bloodshed and destruction. And I think
Isn't it ironic that we just heard a video from Yaron on melting 100,000 people? And then him only a couple months prior talking about anarchy having led to mass bloodshed. When has anarchy led to mass bloodshed anywhere near the scale of World War II? anywhere near the scale of statist socialism or communism.
Ultimately, it leads inevitably. Offended a bunch of you. I can see it on Sebastian's face, but that's the problem on video, right? But that is the reality of what I believe, right? I think anarchy leads to nothing, and I've said this dozens of times. I think anarchy leads to nothing by bloodshed, destruction, bloodshed and destruction. And I think ultimately it leads inevitably to authoritarianism. So I hate anarchy. I hate that set of ideas.
So I maybe he's using a different. I'm going to assume that he's talking about the anarcho-capitalistic definition of anarchism, because that's who he was talking about having just debated. By definition, anarchy cannot lead to bloodshed and destruction, because by definition, anarchy is the absence of rulers. And when you shed someone's blood or destroy their property, you are by definition making yourself their de facto ruler. So anyone who would shed innocent blood or destroy peaceful property is not acting in the capacity of an anarchist, of an anarcho-capitalist voluntarist.
And I'm hostile to particularly intellectuals who try to spread those ideas, and I try to interact as little as possible with them. But I don't hate other libertarians. I mean, there are many libertarians, economists, political scientists who, again, I think do good work. Some people at Cato, not everybody. Some people at FI. I work with FI. I've worked with Cato. I've worked with, lots of different organizations over the years on specific issues, on broad issues that they were good at. But the idea of a big tent, I think, dilutes the philosophy to the point where it's meaningless. And as I said, I find anarchy offensive. So I'm not interested in being in a big tent with people I find offensive. So I think that, I don't reject, I speak to libertarian groups all the time. I speak to Students for Liberty. I speak to Federalist Society, to Adam Smith societies, all over the place. So I don't consider myself hostile to libertarianism.
As long as they're the statist libertarian, not the fully consistent libertarian position of voluntarism or anarcho-capitalism, he's fine talking to them.
I consider myself hostile to anarcho-capitalists, and I consider myself hostile to the idea of a big tent. I think the idea of a big tent is bad.
I agree with him that the idea of a big tent is bad. I think you should always be calling out immorality and irrationality anywhere and everywhere you see it constantly. That's fine. I don't think you should ever scuttle your ethics or your principles for the sake of having a larger group. I agree with him there.
But regarding the anarchism,
he's just wrong. The problem is you still have to engage with people that are interested in the debate. Engaging with people for debate to sharpen one's ethical understandings is not the same thing as having a big tent. I'm not saying that he's making that argument. I'm just saying that you're not promoting a big tent when you engage in debate with people. And, I've debated socialists, so-called libertarian socialists. I've debated communists. I've debated all sorts of people that I would never associate with and would never want in any tent that I'm in. And it is worthwhile to sharpen one's own mind as well as to show other people, when you debate, when you participate in the fighting match that is clashing reason and evidence, usually everyone wins. That's what I wish he would do until today.
I think that maybe those people maybe just don't understand it yet. They don't necessarily need to be evil persons, right?
I've never said they're evil. I think some of them are evil. I think if you're, Hoppe, a few others, I would consider immoral. But no, I mean, particularly young people. I don't consider young anarchists evil. I think when you're young and you're still trying out ideas, and anarchy has a certain logic to it and a certain rationalistic, logic to it, beauty to it, or whatever.
And a lot of it is the exact same rationality that is part of Ayn Rand's objectivism. It's just taken to its logical, consistent conclusion. And that is the argument in the debate that, I was trying for 2 years now to have with him. But I guess you can just watch my previous videos where I showed the flaw in his logic multiple times in multiple ways. Unfortunately, I was not able to get him on to actually clash horns on this particular topic. Incebeef says he's always been a statist shill, a neocon. I'm surprised that you recently realized that. I don't think he's a neocon, but he's certainly, a statist, and he has been for a long time, and I realized that a long time ago. That wasn't recent. This Hiroshima Nagasaki thing, that's what was recent.
Have a sense to it. It's why I talk to people who are anarchists, why I try to,
he doesn't
convince
do
them
that.
Otherwise. But yes, if you're an anarchist in your 40s, something's wrong.
Well, but still, we don't see you cross-posting much with some libertarians. Like, I think you once told me that you wouldn't, or maybe Tom Woods told me that you would never appear on his show.
I will never be on Tom Woods' show. No.
Why?
Because he's over 40 and he's an anarchist.
He would never appear on Tom Woods' show because he's over 40 and he's an anarchist.
I mean, that's it. If you're over 40 and an anarchist, I'm not sitting on stage with you. You're a bad person. These are not neutral ideas. And I said before, I'm passionate. I take ideas seriously. I take ideas seriously on how they impact your life and my life primarily. Anarchy is a destructive ideology. I'm willing to tolerate it when you're young, because when you're young, you're still trying to figure out what's true and what's not, and you're experimenting with all kinds of ideas and you're trying to figure it out. At some point, my tolerance disappears and it goes away, and I'm not tolerant of anti-life ideas from people who should know better. And anti-life. Now, it's not just that he's
anti-life. We have the anti-life position, guys. We have the anti-life position. Not the guy that just spent 35 minutes advocating melting babies. No, I have the anti-life position. Okay, got it, Yaron. Good job.
It's that he's part of the Mises Institute, which is pro or semi-pro slavery in the South. Right, it was anti the Civil War. That has, you can find articles there, underlying racist agendas, not that Tom Woods is, but the organization he's affiliated with is, that are pacifists, which I consider, nutty. They're pacifists. They're anti-American in foreign policy, every sin in the world. They're pro-Hugo Chavez.
Anti-American.
I hate Ron Paul.
Oh, God. Anti-American.
Hate Ron Paul. Not just
he hates Ron Paul.
They're pro-Hugo Chavez. It's why I hate Ron Paul. Hate Ron Paul, not just dislike Ron Paul. It's because he's pro-Hugo Chavez. Pro-Maduro's regime.
He's saying that Ron Paul is pro-Hugo Chavez? I mean, I'm not familiar. If anybody is familiar with why on earth he would say that, please let me know. I would like to know that.
So I will not deal with people who are over a certain age, let's say 40, who advocate ideas that I consider fundamentally anti-life and who might be confused with objectivism. So people like Tom Woods, Murray Rothbard, anybody affiliated with the Von Mises Institute. I mean, I find those ideas worse than the worst ideas of the left.
Anti-life.
And to some extent, because these people claim to be Ayn Rand fans. They claim to be pro-liberty. When they're exact opposite. They're anti-liberty. Now I become grumpy, right? Now I'm living up to my reputation. It really is, there is a fun. These people claim to be Ayn Rand fans. They claim to be pro-liberty. When they're exact opposite. They're anti-liberty. Now I become grumpy, right?
They're anti-liberty. They're the exact opposite of pro-liberty. I am being lectured by a collectivist calling himself an objectivist that I am the anti-liberty person. It's patently absurd.
Now I'm living up to my reputation.
It's comedy.
It really is. There is a fundamental philosophical, but not just philosophical in an abstraction. There's a fundamental difference between the kind of libertarian, the anarcho-capitalist of Tom Woods, and objectivism. These are philosophies that are completely opposite. They happen to have some agreement on economics. But with all due respect, economics is not that important. And I'm an economist, and it's not that important. But they have no relationship when it comes to morality. They have no relationship in epistemology. They have no relationship in metaphysics. And they don't have any relationship in politics, because the one's an anarchist and one believes in actually limited government. So, and no relationship in aesthetics. So in 90% of the philosophy, we're opposed. And you want me to be their friend because of 10%.
It's not 90%.
But I have more in common with leftists
it's
than
10%.
with anarcho-capitalists.
He just doesn't see the contradictions inherent in his own philosophy.
There is two issues with that, and issues. Aaron points out that don't you think that the more good would do just go and debate him? You don't have to endorse him. And the second point is that
debating somebody, let me just finish. Debating something is an endorsement. Debating somebody
is an endorsement is precisely false. It is engaging in a debate with somebody is to upfront state that you disagree with them. How is that not the opposite of an endorsement? What? What?
Is a sanction. There's no reason to debate him. That's the big appeal. And
this is the leftist don't platform people that you disagree with or that have ideas that you don't like. Don't platform them. Their ideas might get out. Come on. I thought I was the one no better than commies. Come on.
And again, I'm going to insult some of you, but tough. Anarcho-capitalism is not a legitimate ideology.
Not an argument.
It's not a legitimate set of ideas. It's
not
not
an
worthy
argument.
of debate. It is a fringe, marginal,
opinion.
Insignificant portion of the world is anarcho-capitalist. And
fringe, marginal, insignificant portion of the world, says the objectivist.
Most people grow out of it relatively quickly, right? So again, there are not that many over 40. And it's just not worth debating. I mean, I did that debate in Poland. I've done it once. Anybody can go watch it. And if you don't, if that's not good enough, then, you're going to have to figure it out yourselves.
Yaron hated this debate. He didn't want to come. I was not sure if event is going to happen.
I mean,
but
I don't think there's anything else good here.
Yaron mentions this debate like every time. So I guess.
I did hate it, and there's a sense in which I'm glad I didn't. There's a sense in which I feel a little dirty for doing it. I mean, he was there defending, sex with children. I mean, or he couldn't argue against it. I mean, I can't think of anything more where I want to wash my hands and stay away.
Yeah, that was repugnant. That was disgusting and absolutely not representational of not a single voluntarist anarcho-capitalist that I know. I mean, that's not mainstream. I don't know where he found this guy. It's suspicious that was the one he chose to debate. It sounds like it was a strategic debate. Debate the one that you can then use for the rest of your life to show why you won't debate them anymore. How convenient, man. That's convenient.
And at Objektivism.pl, it was I don't remember the title. I will post it in the...
That's a great point, Artemia Selena. Oh my God, that's a great point. Yeah, so he sanctioned and endorsed the anarchist in Poland that apparently argued for pedophilia. Yaron Brook, that's the headline. Yaron Brook sanctions pedophilic anarchy. There we go. That's his own arguments used against him.
Afterwards.
It's easy to find. All you do is do Yaron Brook anarchy, and that's the first hit you get on YouTube.
Of course that's not true. Of course he doesn't. Debating is not an endorsement.
Man in headphones,
okay, I'm done with that. The last thing I'll say to Yaron for probably a long while, because I'm kind of over it, is this. I'm not 40 yet. Now's your chance. You got about 15 days. Come on the show. If you can. All right. That's it.
Put me up big.
All right.
Your booze mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
Yes!
Every breath I take without your permission raises my self-esteem.
Yes! Yes! And feel free, guys. Feel free, clip me saying that to Yaron, and like for the last time, let this be. This is the only time I have asked people to outright blow up Yaron Brook's social media. Clip that, and if you, I'll clip it myself and release it on the channel separately, probably tonight or tomorrow if you want to wait and share that with him. But everybody, just tweet it, just drop it in the comments of his videos. Don't let him exist on this planet any longer without seeing that little challenge. I'm done with this. All right.